Now to the latest aftermath from the U.S. airstrikes on Syria. The U.S. State Secretary Rex Tillerson will visit Moscow Tuesday to hold talks with his Russian counterpart. The situation in Syria is expected to be high on the agenda. However, the past weeks have seen U.S. leaders giving signals on U.S. policy towards Assad and Syria. Mixed signals, that is. RT's Alexei Yarshevsky joins us live now to bring more details. Alexei, I'm wondering how exactly you've seen the position of diplomats changing on Syria over the past few days. I mean, one day we hear Assad his fate is up to the Syrian people. The next,
It is a very confusing time for those following the U.S. politics. Not only the pundits on mainstream media have flipped their opinions on Donald Trump after he attacked the Syrian airbase on Thursday night. Not only some of the lawmakers on Capitol Hill have changed their position, but also the top diplomat of the United States, Rex Tillerson, has changed his stance over the last few weeks. Let's listen to 3 statements by the U.S. State Secretary.
Longer-term status of President Assad will be decided by the Syrian people. With the acts that he has taken, it would seem that there would be no role for him to govern the Syrian people. It's through that political process that we believe the Syrian people will ultimately be able to decide the fate of Bashar al-Assad.
From non-regime change policy to regime change policy and back again, all in the space of, what, like 10 days? Not more than that. But if you think this is confusing, his subordinate, the UN ambassador of the United States, Nikki Haley, also flipped her position within just 3 days. Let's listen.
It is time for all civilized nations to stop the horrors that are taking place in Syria and demand a political solution.
We know that it is not going to be, there's not any sort of option where a political solution is going to happen with Assad at the head of the regime.
So there you heard it. Looking for a political solution. Political solution is not possible. And all this just precedes Rex Tillerson's first visit to Moscow to hold talks with his counterpart, and even possibly President Putin. We'll see what comes out of it. But there's no question the Syrian issue will be topping the agenda, and interesting to see what comes out of those talks.
What about non-political reactions to this development, Alexei? Americans are reacting in the streets as well, from what I understand.
Definitely, there have been protests, anti-war protests in the streets of American cities over this weekend. Los Angeles, Chicago, San Francisco, New York, Washington, D.C. Well, you can say that there were so many people out in the streets. Some protests only gathered several dozen, some maybe more than 100. It's, of course, not the 1960s, yes, in terms of the anti-war movement, but definitely some sort of momentum in the anti-war movement is there, and people are making themselves heard. Obviously, this will depend on the future steps by the Trump administration regarding Syria, whether there be any more escalation, any more airstrikes or missile strikes. But again, a lot will be clearer this week when Tillerson meets Lavrov in Moscow.
Well, people seem prepared to resist war escalation, at least in the early days of the strike we saw last week. Alexei Yarshevsky monitoring developments for us there. Thanks.